Facebook. Hello and welcome, friends. We are honored to be here today on the weekly show by filmmaker Tracy Schott, creator of Finding Jen's Voice, a powerful documentary that shines a light on intimate partner violence. I'm Hope Katz-Gibbs, founder of Incandescent Radio and Incandescent TV, here today with our co-host, Kelsey McKay, who is a prosecutor in Austin, Texas, who specializes in strangulation, and she'll talk more about that. And we're going to be interviewing Lovern Gordon, founder of the Love Life Now Foundation, an organization based near Boston, Mass, which promotes year-round awareness against domestic violence and bridges the gap between the shelters where women and their kids go for a safe space and what they do next. Lovern is also the author of a new powerful book out in June, I believe, called The Legacy He Left Me, The Legacy He Left Me, an extension of her organization's work, and it chronicles her personal story as a child witness, an adult survivor of domestic abuse, and how she is thriving now. So I am going to throw this over to Miss Tracy Schott to take it away.
Thanks, Hope. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. So we started Voices for Change with two main missions. One was to bring information to people about intimate partner violence that was easily accessible. There's a lot known, a lot of research done, and it tends to get locked in ivory towers. So my goal was to bring that information to anybody who needed it. My second goal, maybe my primary goal, was to amplify the voices of survivors of intimate partner violence, because their experiences really inform us so much, even more so than the research. So too often I feel like voices of survivors of intimate partner violence get drowned out by the voices of so many others. And it was important to me to really honor their experience. So to that end, I'm extremely honored to have Lovern Gordon with us today. And Lovern, your book, your website, your experience, and your efforts to really change the world align very much with our missions, with Hope and Kelsey. So we're really glad to welcome a kindred spirit here. So let's start with talking about your book. It's pretty exciting, The Legacy He Left Me. And so that details both your experiences as a child growing up in an abusive household, but also your own relationship. Tell us your story.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. And I am so honored to be able to be even writing a book, right? So a lot of people go through this issue and come out on the other end, and they're literally just seeking to survive. And so the hope through our organization, Love Life Now, as you mentioned, is to let folks know that there is life after abuse, but not just life, but that you can thrive, right? And the book is now going to be an extension of the awareness work that we do. And so it's just a privilege to be able to do that. So as you mentioned, I'm a child witness of the issue growing up in Trinidad. It's the island just before Venezuela, going down that way. And for many years, the extent of my life on the island, I witnessed domestic violence in our home growing up. And it was a really hard thing, because as a child, watching your mother go through this, it completely left me feeling helpless. I was one of five children, the middle child, and our two older siblings also suffered the brunt of the child abuse. He didn't really hold back on, really beating them for simple little things in a really rash way. So in an effort, by the time I came along 7 years later, after my oldest brother, I realized I wanted none of it. I didn't want to get beaten the way that they were getting beaten. And I heard from my mom, but I also felt angry from my mom because she was getting the full-on physical attacks as well as verbal and emotional assaults. And I just really tried to do everything to stay on his good side. He was well-read, he was articulate, he was charming. He was the one that had the degree and the education. And she at the time, right? No more of that. She at the time was uneducated and financially dependent on him. And I looked upon that as weak. I thought at the time that, first of all, she could do better. I always resented the fact that she didn't leave, and why sometimes when she took us and ran, why she didn't stay gone. And I grew up thinking, by the time I was 13, 14, I said, if anything, I don't want to be her. I want to be him. I want to be smart. I want to be educated. I want to, I want to be financially independent, because I believed in what he was showing me was that this power and control that he had not over not just her, but us as children. I wanted that. I wanted that in some sense. And so I sought to be smart. I sought to do, and obviously I was doing it as well to stay on his good side, because that's what he sort of required of his children, is that he wanted them to be good. And anything straying outside of that resulted in beatings. And as I said, I did everything to stay on his good side. And so by the time I was 15, he allowed me to migrate to the States, leaving my siblings and them behind, to start high school. He believed that I had a really great shot of doing well in the States. And, he was right. I came here and I lived with my grandparents for 3 years while I finished high school, and then had to migrate back to Trinidad to get our permanent residency at the time. Well, by that time I'm 18, and my younger siblings and I were now growing up, and we're not standing for him to put his hands on our mother. And we're saying, listen, you can verbally say what you want, but don't ever touch her again. And he adhered to that. And so over the next couple of years, while we were waiting for this permanent residency at the time to come through, he realized that he was losing that power and control that he had exuded over her for so many years, that was dwindling because we were stepping in between. And so by the time, 1998 rolled around, he let her go, and he let her migrate to the States with myself now and my 2 younger siblings. And we left and came here, and I was 2 years behind my peers and had to start college right away. And so I did. I started Suffolk University at nights, went to started an entry-level job in corporate America, and things were going well. I was saying to myself at that time, I now am closer to who I thought my father was, in control and, powerful in my own sense, and that nobody would ever, come to me that way, right? So, because I knew it all. Fortunately, children that grow up in abusive homes tend to go on to become either victims or abusers. And I was no exception. I was the only one out of the 5 children that became a victim. And so we all lived in the same house. We all witnessed the same thing. But I took away from what I saw being a victim. And so that came about while I was, again, going to school, working, and this guy approached me, and 10 years my senior, it didn't matter. He didn't look it, and we started dating, and things were great. And about 3 months into the relationship, he slapped me the first time over me not, checking in with him one particular morning. And he was so irate and so infuriated and so paranoid that I had not done that because I was cheating on him. And the more I tried to appease him, that did nothing. And that conversation, as I said, ended with a slap. And he stormed off like nothing had happened. And so I'm left there trying to figure out what I did to cause this, but then catching myself and saying, no, I did nothing. I told the truth, and I'm done. I'm through. Unfortunately, he came back about 3 or 4 to my doorstep while I wasn't home, and a bunch of apologies, voicemails. I'm sorry, please call me. I'm worried you're not picking up my calls. I don't know what I did. If I overreacted, I just want to talk to you. I want to explain. And I let him have the floor. And when he did call back, and I took the call, it was because I ended up accepting that apology. In my mind at the time, people often ask, how do people fall into these types of relationships? And right there and then, I had started to question my reaction to what he had done, because he was now telling me in this apology that I made him do it. If you had called me, I probably wouldn't have acted that way. I love you so much that you make me do these things. And I, again, questioned myself and said, you know what, Lovern, maybe you could have called. right? And so this was typical of us to check in with each other, him more so than I. And this was one of the big red flags that I had missed in the beginning, because he would always call me 24/7, even in, before I got to work, 3 or 4 times at least. And I realized later that that was to make sure I said where I was is where I was. And so I accepted that apology, not realizing that he had manipulated the situation. I did equate it to my mother's history with the issue. I said, it's not as bad. It was just a slap. He did say he was sorry. He did say he was not going to do it again. He does love me. He did go to elaborate lengths to apologize. And so victims take all of that into the equation when that apology comes. It's like you're almost, sort of making excuses as to why it isn't that bad. And that unfortunately started the cycle of 2 years of abuse. So the book itself, I don't want to give too much away, but the book itself really chronicles what, being a child witness is, and how that looks to, children, and how helpless they feel, and the things that they can do versus the things they can do. What it's like to fall into these types of relationships. What happens over the course of the relationship that you may now be encountering, but not telling yourself that it's that bad. It's not that bad. So it sort of gives all of the, the red flags, but it also gives what leaving looks like and what that looked like for me. And so I give a really firsthand point of view as to what safety planning can be, because I missed the mark on that. And it put my life in danger. I mean, it was to the point where 2 years later, when I decided that I got to my breaking point and told him that I was through, that he then showed up at my door trying to break into my apartment, but not before he cut the phone lines in the basement, making sure, or trying to make sure, that I would have no access to the outside world. I finally called police that day, and he ran away. And even at that time, I still didn't want him to get in trouble. I just wanted the abuse to stop. So I talk about, what the sort of what the weight on the shoulders of victims are when they decide to leave, and that leaving is the most dangerous time for them. How dangerous it could be, and it's not just as easy as, why don't you just leave, right? We talk about, and so I'm really hoping that when people read this book, even if you've never encountered this issue, insight as to what this issue looks like for victims and survivors alike. And even if you have encountered the issue, that you can see life after isn't supposed to be all hum and drum. Nothing that you did was your fault, even though they've told you that 1,000 times. You cannot blame yourself. And I talk about self-care, what that looks like, and picking yourself up and trying to do the best that you can with what you have, to really try and mend the pieces. And mend the pieces we must as survivors, right? Because all of the weight, again, is put on our shoulders. All the onus responsibility is put on us to pick up the pieces and move on and get your credit right because they messed you up financially, to keep yourself safe after you've left and you said you're done, to, get the, PTSD and emotional and mental health. I mean, all of this stuff is left on us. And so, the work that we do through Love Life Now, as a matter of fact, our post this morning on social media is an ad where men are saying, we need to be accountable for other men, right? It should not be on the victim to get themselves safe. It should be, why are people, or men, or women, or whoever the perpetrator is, why are they doing this?
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing the book come out. It sounds like it's, the personal experience is so important for people to understand, but it also sounds like you've got, it's more than just, this is what happened to me. It's this is how you can learn from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I know Kelsey had some questions.
Yeah, Lovern, you brought up quite a few really interesting points. So coming from someone who was a practitioner in the criminal justice system
Yeah.
for years, and now, of course, I'm on the outside of that, and in both environments worked with survivors. But you brought up so many, I think, incredible points when it comes to domestic violence is not just an incident, right? It's an experience. And in your case, it's not just an experience with one relationship, it's the development
Mhm.
child growing up into an adult and doing everything you could to avoid it. And a lot of the behaviors you mentioned, the minimizing, the going back, re-engaging with the abuser, these are all things that make sense when we hear you tell the story. But I know in the criminal justice system, victims' behavior gets so judged, even though it's coming from a place of surviving. And so I'm curious if you had any interaction either as a child or you just mentioned in your account as an adult that the criminal justice system got involved. Talk to us about what that experience was like and if you experienced any of those judgments from the individual acts, I guess, that you portrayed that they misunderstood.
Yeah, and so great question, because it's so different for so many people. And I'll sort of go back and talk about my mother, right? And so again, this is I was born in 77. I'm giving away my age, no problem. But you know, I really knew myself in the 80s, and I can tell you in the 80s in a third world country on an island, domestic violence wasn't even a term that was coined yet. So when the police, if the police were called by maybe a concerned neighbor, which was very rare, if the police were called and they showed up, they often deferred to our father, right? So he was the first point of contact that they made. So, Mr. Augustine, what's going on here? And it was like, okay, I'm looking at the dynamic. And again, 7, 8 years old, I'm trying to figure out, why aren't you talking to her? Like, even then, it was like so frustrating. Why you didn't just come and arrest this man, our father, right? Who I loved. I had this love-hate relationship with him. And so police would show up and it's like, you know, well, after hearing from the smart, articulate person, right? Not the weak, you know, what you consider weak or what you're telling him, listen, this is a husband and wife thing. You guys patch that up and don't let us have to come back here anymore. And then they're gone. And it's like, wait a minute. I thought the police, from what I saw on TV, right? They're supposed to come and protect you. They're supposed to take care of the bad guy and take him away. And that never happened. So that hope was always depleted whenever, you know, again, very rarely that it happened. And then you fast forward to me where the onus to call the police, when I finally felt like my back was against the wall, this person is banging on my apartment door, trying to bust it down. And I knew, you know, he kept saying, I want to talk to you. We need to talk. What you said doesn't make any sense. Did you pick up with another guy? And you're hearing this level of anger in this person's voice, and you know that they're intent on harming you further than what's already happened. My God, what else is there to do? So you pick up the phone, you call the police, and what did I do? I still didn't give him up, because at the time, and leading up to that incident, for many years in the Black community, I had heard, you don't call the cops on a Black man. They already have it bad enough in society. You don't want to be the responsible party for putting another Black man in jail in the pipeline for something as this minor as this. I mean, he just slapped you around some, right? It's not that bad, right? It's the same thing that I had told myself throughout the relationship. What's happening is not that bad. I kept comparing it to what my mom went through. And so, you know, you have this sort of this thing on your shoulder that you're carrying. And it's like, when they come, well, are they going to arrest him? You're thinking about, you know, if he has children, are they going to put him in jail? Now you're responsible for their children not getting fed. Like all of these things that sort of pop up. And so, like I said, I called the police, but that didn't stop him, right? I didn't give his name up because I wanted to protect him. And so they left, and they said that they couldn't do anything because I wasn't willing to be truthful with them.
You bring up a really good point about the role of race and how it plays. We know that there's a disproportionate impact of domestic violence and homicides for women of color. And so I want to talk to you about, you certainly recognize a very important point, which is concerns if the abuser is a Black man and contributing to that, and how that acts as a barrier to survivors. I'd love to ask a little bit about, when she came to America, you were a professional woman. What role did being a Black woman play to create any additional obstacles or concerns or dynamics in your either ability to leave the relationship, you know, at work,
or speak up
or speak up about it?
Yeah.
Can you a little bit about the role of race for you and what added obstacles it added to it.
Very good question. And so, one of my safe refuges. So at this point, throughout the course of this relationship, I became more and more isolated from family and friends. I was no longer the social butterfly to go out, hang with friends like I would normally do, pick up the phone and have free conversations as I would before, because he was monitoring all my calls. And then even if he wasn't in my presence, he would check my call logs. So going to work was a refuge. I was there 8 hours a day. And it was where I could be myself, unless he showed up to the job unexpectedly and accosted me for the type of dress I was wearing. It was too short, or the underwear was too flimsy. And what are you trying to do? Pick up another guy in the office? Are you trying to flirt with guys when you could walk to lunch? What is this? So, a strangulation would happen downstairs, or, a slap around, getting pushed around it. And it's like, you then have to get yourself back up together, because you're at work and you go to the bathroom, you dry your face off, and you go back to your desk like nothing had happened. And I did that in part because I didn't want anybody at work finding out, because couple things. I was one of 2 Black women in the office in a predominantly white space. And the stereotype that, once again, when I'd come to America, I understood was Black women bring drama. And I didn't want to be associated with that stereotype. And I thought to myself that if anybody had found out, my boss or any of my colleagues had found out that this was happening to me, that they would connect me with that stereotype. I wanted none of that. So I did my best and I also thought that I would be fired. Let's just start there. They would understand why I maybe miss days sometimes. Maybe I had like a bruise that I didn't want to be seen. He never really slapped me on my face after the first attack. It was more like slapping around with the body and all this sorts of stuff. But, there was some days that I just I physically couldn't do it. And they would now understand why that was. And so I wanted nobody to know, because I didn't want to get fired. And I did not want anybody shaming me or blaming me for the abuse. So come to the end of the relationship and sitting in the hospital room, where the doctor is telling me, the first time I'm seeking injuries for an attack, which started for the last attack, went from 9 o'clock the night before till about 2 o'clock the next morning. And I'm sitting there and the doctor's saying, I can get you help because these injuries aren't consistent with you falling in the shower. And that meaning to me that, again, my job can find out, my school where I'm a freshman, they're going to finally know why I'm flunking all my classes. I am on my way to receiving an F at my dream school that I thought about going for so many years. They would now understand that. I'd be shamed. My family would finally find out, and they'd say, why would you let yourself go through this, knowing the history that your mother has with this issue? I just thought that people were going to look at me different. And again, the whole idea of encountering police and getting them involved, and the ramifications that could potentially have. Would they show up and kill him? Would they arrest him, and anything to do with his family? Oh, it was just too much. And then subsequently, that didn't stop him, as I said, the police showing up, because I didn't give his name, and he waited to see if any heat was coming his way, and none did. So he then started stalking me. He knew he physically couldn't come at me, so he started leaving derogatory notes on my car. And that forced me then to finally get a restraining order, because this level of crazy was just heightening and heightening. And I'm saying to myself, my God, if he can approach my car and put these type of notes on it in like wee hours of the morning, who am I to not think that when I come out at one point in the morning that he's going to have a knife, a gun, and shoot me dead where I stand with nobody to be a witness. And so
you've brought up so many different lethality indicators, and I'm curious if you mentioned safety planning, that's an area that you didn't feel like you had adequate knowledge about before you left.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned so many lethality indicators, and we all know that stalking is very common leading up to a homicide, as well as strangulation and separation.
Yes.
And when you called to report those stalking incidences, which again tend to get looked at as an incident, what's the big deal that someone left a note on your window?
Exactly.
Did you think police responded to that any differently? Did they seem to understand it?
So I skipped the police that time, and I went straight to the courthouse. without any knowledge of how to do it, right? I said I was, because this was to me, if I went to court and finally now I was at the point where I didn't care about being a black woman and, putting another black man in jail. It was like, now I'm saying to myself, my God, I'm gonna die at some point if I let this keep going, right? And so I went to the courthouse, went to the clerk's office. I was told I'm looking to file a restraining order. They said, go to the clerk's office. I go to the clerk's office. I'll never forget. And the woman at the counter said, okay, fill this out. And in my mind, I'm thinking, and she said, on the back here, you're gonna want to detail what it is you've experienced and why you need the restraining order. So my 23-year-old self, right, is now in the courthouse and I'm filling out this affidavit. All the, the front end stuff is pretty self-explanatory. And then they tell you, explain yourself. And I'm like, oh my God, how do I sound as articulate as possible so that these people take me seriously without giving too much? And so I proceeded to write my affidavit and explain that this person was stalking me, that he was showing up at random times, leaving these type of notes, and I explained in detail what he said. And I'm thinking when I'm done with that's the shame that I have to do. I'm thinking to myself, when they take this back, because I don't know, they're going to take this back in the office and they're going to read it. Whoever's reading this is going to be like, this girl is stupid. Like, why would she stay with this guy and this guy? And that's what I'm thinking, right? And so I'm like, okay, that amount of shame I'm done with, only to be told that you have to come back to go before a judge and your abuser has the right to come and give his argument too. And I freaked out, Kelsey, because now I'm thinking, my God, I got to face this guy, right? It wasn't explained to me that that's what it was. And so again, if you don't know, you don't know. And so safety planning, which is one of the big things that we talk about through the awareness work of Love Life Now, is that it's so, so important, because getting connected with an agency, a domestic violence agency, where they offer safety planning, that they can, a victim's right, a victim advocate can be with you in court to walk you through that process, to explain to you that this is what is coming next.
Yeah,
there are some people that don't have the language skill to explain themselves on paper. There's some people that don't even speak the language. There's some people that don't understand the nuances of court, right? There's some people that leave, all right, and leave with the clothes on their backs and have to show up at court with what they're wearing, and it may not be court appropriate. How are those people being treated? Well, not so great from what I've learned over the years. And sometimes it's a deterrent for women of color that have to face judges that, and that's just keeping it real. And Kelsey, you can probably speak to that.
I mean, what you've really highlighted is not just with race, but with this type of gender-based violence, is how inequitable the criminal justice or the criminal legal system is in the treatment
overall.
Defendants and victims. Defendants have the right to an attorney. They have constitutional rights outlined, whereas survivors don't get that. And so just like you, many of them walk into a room to get a protective or restraining order and don't even know what it is they're supposed to write. So the role of victim advocates in holding the hands and guiding and providing not only support, but understanding and translating what's happening in the system and what to expect is so incredibly important, and really not a topic I think we address enough. So many survivors just drop out of the system because they don't have that support, and then frankly get blamed for not cooperating.
And then you wonder why victims go back, why victims in that time where they're trying to survive and stay alive, that then they're again repeatedly hearing from their abuser, who's calling them and saying, look, if you go through with this, I'm going to kill you. If you go through with this, I'm going to kill the kids. If you go through with this, there's all these ramifications. How many times do you hear from the news? I think, Tracy, you said this is not a news story. This is not a magazine story that you see for a minute and then that's it. There's a before, where things have been building up beforehand. There's the incident, right? Murder, abuse, whatever, someone being harmed. And then there's an after, where people are picking up pieces. And so how often do you hear that she was getting ready to leave and take the kids and he killed her?
Yeah. Oh, it's very.
He was getting ready to leave and she snapped. Like this is what's happening. It's real life. And it's because of these certain types of things. Maybe it's because they called for help and help wasn't available. Maybe they got to the courthouse and they didn't get the adequate resources there. Maybe it's because, again, throughout all of that, maybe they're in shelter and the abuser is still calling them and saying, I've changed. Look, I'll go to counseling. I'll go to church with you. I'll talk to the pastor. I'll be better. I won't do it again. Right. All throughout that process, they're having to take the responsibility of keeping this person away from them just so they can live, just so they can survive. And it's insane to me.
Yeah, I always say the most insane part of the whole criminal justice system around intimate partner violence is how much pressure and responsibility is put on victims to ensure that justice is done. And, if somebody goes in and robs a convenience store, they don't hold the person behind the counter, responsible for whether or not there's a prosecution that takes place.
Meaning that the abuse is ongoing, unlike a stranger convenience store robbery, there's not ongoing dynamics. There's dynamics that have already instilled fear that are going to control your even willingness to reach out for help. Then there's the incident, but then there is all this stuff that comes after. And we so often, I heard you say, why did I go back to him? It's really more, how did he effectively re-engage you into the web? Because
exactly.
Calling incessantly. And then you think about survivors with children who are forced to share custody, how often those children get used. You mentioned that your mother's abuser also abused the children. And that's something that I think gets forgotten so much. And that this ongoing abuse that continues, whether you've reported it or not. And the bottom line is sometimes it's easier and safer for the survivor to be with that abuser than to not be with, because separation just takes it to a whole nother layer. And again,
a whole other level. And they hold on, like you said,
all your worst case scenarios. What's the least worst option?
Correct. The devil that I know is better than the devil that I don't know, because all of this stuff, all of this territory is unknown. And not to mention, you've been told over and over again by your abuser that you're never going to survive without me. You're nothing without me.
I've seen so many abusers. It's like, well, she's the breadwinner. Well, but he has set up the finances so that she is drained, doesn't have access, her destroyed, she can't. There's all these little things that get turned back on the victim in the system for, why did you do this, rather than what has he done?
Right.
So that you activate your survival instinct to, as Tracy said, choose between a bad choice and a worse choice, which is
absolutely
is usually death. And so sometimes your best option is not to do it as the criminal system sees fit.
Absolutely.
But you also both brought up the importance of having some support. And I think one of the misunderstandings among many victims of domestic violence is the belief that the local agency is really just a shelter. And in your situation, there was no reason for you to go to a shelter. You had your own apartment. Yeah. But the shelters do so much more. Most of the good domestic violence organizations that I've met provide a legal advocate. They help you get that restraining order. They sit with you in court. They help you access health care. They get you counseling. They
housing stabilization.
Exactly. So there's so many other services beyond sleeping in a bed.
Absolutely. One of the things that is incredibly important to me in doing this work through Love Life Now is highlighting the work that domestic violence agencies do. And so every year we pick one D agency advocate for. And so, if we host a fundraiser or an event, proceeds, some of that is going back to the DV agency who are on the front line, they're on the front line doing the work, right? And so this year that's Transition House out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so we're so proud to highlight the work, because like you said, they offer all of a plethora of services that people don't know about. And often the word shelter is daunting to people, right? For me, and why it's important to highlight what they do, it's because when I was sitting in that ER for the very first time seeking help, the doctor said, I can get you help, that to me meant going to a shelter. And what I thought of shelter when I heard that is that it's a big open room with beds with a bunch of women that I didn't know. And I didn't want that. Again, like you said, I had my own apartment. I can go back and be safe. And I didn't realize it was the most dangerous time. I didn't realize that DV agencies or DV shelters are different from homeless shelters. And I packed them in as one and the same. I didn't understand that DV shelters only are typically housed in a house setting, right? A very big house where you have your own room, right? You share the common areas, maybe the kitchen and the living room space or the play space, and children have a play space. Okay, they try to make it as home bound as possible, right? So that you can get a sense your pride is still intact. When you enter, you get a plethora of goods that sort of get you started. Towels, sheets, linen. That's one of the things that we do as well, is we host a bedding drive so we can replenish those items for the shelter that we're advocating for each year in October, right? Ask people to donate a new twin sheet and pillow, right? So these things, the little things that you don't think about when you've had to now flee for your life, the clothes on your back, they help with that. And that's why it's so important to point out, like you said, the services that they offer, because it's not a one, it's not a, you go and you're there and it's just there. They're really trying to help you re-engage into society safely and on your own, right? So housing stabilization is a big deal. You're assigned an advocate, a case manager that will work with you to make sure that, your 3-month emergency stay isn't and leaving you ending up on the street, or your 6-month stay, or however long an emergency stay is at the particular shelter they're at. But they're everywhere. And so while we talk about, that help can be daunting, help cannot be as helpful as it could be. Sometimes with the criminal justice system, I do want to urge people to do reach out for help, because when you do, that's when the light at the tunnel starts to open up. It's a little bit crazy in the beginning, but it gets better. It's better than the hell you're dealing with now. So I urge people to just speak up.
And I think you've covered some of this, but can you talk to us, Lovern, about why specifically you started your wonderful organization? You've mentioned a few times the Love
Life Now.
Now I see the poster behind you. When did you start that, and why did you start it?
Yeah, so officially, thank you. Officially now it's 10 years this November, which I am so insanely grateful for, to be still doing this work. It's what drives me. And it really is passion work. And so I started it because the year prior to starting officially, I had been dared by a few girlfriends of mine who would have, girls' night. And, one of them was hosting a beauty pageant, and she was going to host her own beauty pageant. She said, Lovern, you should take part. You got the body for it. I said, no, that's not my thing. And, they said, gosh, what are you afraid? We dare you. And that's all they had to say to me. You don't dare me, okay? I'm going to follow through. I'm going to do my best. And, granted, I didn't take it as seriously as I could. I ended up winning. And so that was like, whoa. And then you had to go on to nationals in LA to compete there as well. And I ended up winning there too. So these back-to-back pageant titles I now have to pick a platform to advocate for. And DV was an easy choice. Domestic violence, in short, was an easy choice because of my history with the issue. And initially, I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into. I really thought that I was just going to say domestic violence is wrong, I'm a survivor, stop, and just use my voice as a platform. But when I started doing the work and understanding the dynamics, I took a domestic violence 101 course to become an advocate at a shelter that I wanted to volunteer at. And I initially was like, what the hell do I need to take a DV 101 course for? I witnessed this thing. I've been in this thing. Like, what could you teach me about this issue? And I got to tell you guys, when I walked out of that training, I was blown away. I mean, there was so much information that I did not understand about this issue that was now made sense to me, like connecting the dots for me as a child witness and an adult survivor, and then even as it affected LGBTQ and men and teenagers. 1 in every 3 teens, 1 in every 7 men, and 1 in every 4 women will experience this in their lifetime. And so in doing that, I'm like, there's no way I'm just doing this pageant. So when the pageant titles were up for the year and I'd created those initiatives, that's where the fire just was lit. And I'm like, I want to continue this work as much as I can. And people had said, maybe you should start a nonprofit. Next year, Love Life Now was formed. And so we've been doing, the initiatives that I started out with. I want to say to you, if I ever approached your car in traffic, hounding you down to come to one of our walks or to donate a twin sheet and pillow, I apologize.
Lovern, you bring up such a really interesting point. Just I want to comment on real quick. I know we're getting short on time, but the mistake I think so many people in the system make, and probably outside, is thinking that survivors are the expert on these dynamics. So many, and here you experience it as a child, as an adult. And law enforcement, prosecutors, I think we tend to assume, well, you understand the dynamics. And I find one of the most powerful things is to educate survivors so they understand their own experience, because it's confusing. Abusers are very manipulative and tactical.
Absolutely.
And really exploit your specific vulnerabilities. So like books like Bancroft has a great book out, is one of the first things I do to help educate survivors so they know what they went through, because we rely on you to be an expert, and you are the witness, you are the victim, not the expert on the case. And so
you're the expert in your own experience, but it doesn't necessarily give you a structure in which to understand that experience.
No.
And that's part of the reason for the work that I've done, is trying to take the structure that researchers really do know this work. They have really examined it. They've been studying domestic violence for almost 50 years. It's been around a long time.
Yeah.
And we know a lot about it, but the general public doesn't know a lot about it. And until the general public does, it's just going to keep happening, because you don't see it coming. And once you're in it, it's very hard to see your way out of it without help. But on the flip side of that, when somebody like you can come out and say, this is my experience, this is what it felt like, it resonates so much more with everybody, potential victims, survivors, and just your average person on the street
who doesn't have insight, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's what, again, to circle back to the book, it's really sort of getting people, again, even if you've never experienced this issue, sort of a backhand insight as to what this issue looks like. And I know there are a few of my friends in the DV network who have written books to that same end, to get people understanding. But again, not everybody's circumstances are the same. And it's my hope that when folks read this, that they, again, get the sense of what, again, as a Black woman, what my experience was, and so that they can generally understand not just what women go through, but what Black women go through as well. In this,
well,
and again, so people can see themselves in me.
Every one of the things that I found, I interviewed 35 victims, closer to 40 victims of intimate partner violence when I was doing Finding Jen's Voice. And when I spoke to the women, I spoke to 40 very unique, different women. Everybody had their own past experiences. Everybody had their own personality that they brought into that experience. But when they described their abusers and their abusers' behaviors, I felt like everybody was talking about the same person.
Yes.
And that to me is a part of the conversation that we're going to have to continue to have.
Absolutely.
Who are these abusers, and why do they keep doing the same thing?
And why aren't we holding them more accountable?
Exactly.
Why is the conversation always, we need to keep ourselves safe? Stop killing us. Stop harming us. Why? Why is the shift in the spotlight not on them? Right? And that's my hope.
Abusers have their own playbook.
True.
They might look different in terms of what they're doing, but their goals are the same. And the ultimate goal at the end of it is to avoid accountability. So
Mhm.
so many victims get into situations where they are minimizing, excusing, he's made them feel bad for reporting. Oh, it could cost me my job. And so they use
Right.
these tactics to employ accountability, all the way from if you call the police, I'll kill you, all the way through,
Mhm.
we're going to lose health insurance if I go to prison, this
Yep.
prosecutor this. And so that is one of their tactics and main goals, is to avoid that accountability. And survivors are walking around just going like, why don't you just tell them the truth? I think it's shocking to me how often survivors are shocked that an
Mhm.
abuser isn't pleading to a case. They're like, well, he did it. And I'm like, well, but that does, like, he's not accepting accountability like a
Right.
lot of decent humans would. He's
Right.
attempting to avoid it. And I think that's always kind of a layer of like, how can he say he didn't do it? Look at the picture of my black eye.
Yep.
I think that comes as a shock that so many things abusers do set that avoidance of accountability up, even often before you call the police.
Yes. And way before, right? So they're telling you from jump. I mean, even with my first apology, my gosh, the blame was being deflected on me in part, right? You made me do this because I love you so much. If you had only checked in with me, this
Yep.
wouldn't have happened. But you know what? Going forward, never again. I won't do it.
Right.
And my God, you're hearing that over and over and over. You made me do this.
And for
If you didn't wear that dress, this wouldn't have happened.
for parents of teens, and teens in general, you brought that up. I think a good thing to keep in mind is a lot of the things you described with your with the abuser was these like upset that you didn't call, or why are you doing this? And I think if you take that 5-6 years earlier, like into the teenage years, recognizing controlling behaviors in teens, because I think we tend to excuse it like, oh, he must really like you. And I think
Mhm.
maybe
Great point. 90% of the time, Kelsey, when we present DV workshops at high schools, middle schools, even colleges, 90% of the time, at least 2 to 3 girls are coming up to me and saying, me too. And they didn't realize it was abuse. They thought this is the way things are supposed to go. Well, he really just wants to make sure I'm safe. No, he is trying to make sure you say where you are and make sure that's what it is at any given point in time. And that's wrong. He should trust you. At the heart of a healthy relationship is trust. And if you say you're going to go hang out with your friends, 5, 6, 7, 8 calls while you're there is not needed.
Right.
Okay. And so when I break it down to them after, post, discussion and whatnot, and we're talking in private, they're like, oh my God, wow. Or some of them might not. They'd be like, no, you're overreacting. Like, that's just not what it is. Because you know what? That's what they believe. Their peers, even if they've never seen this at home, their peers are in these types of relationships and they think it's cool. So I want to have a guy like Jake because he treats, at least, he buys her all the cool stuff and, he drives a nice car. So what if he tells her, you got to check in 5, 6, 7, 8 times. They believe that's cool. Right. And then some of them, like I said, are witnessing it at home and believing, boys as well. So we cannot excuse boys because boys are seeing this type of behavior at home and believing this is how you treat women from very young. Okay. This is how you get power and respect. This is how you get a girl to listen to you. Right. And so they're bringing these relationships and these attitudes and behaviors into schools. And these relationships, again, are repeating themselves from very early on. This isn't a grown woman thing. This isn't a Black woman thing. This isn't by the time you get to 22 or 23, that's when you kind of start experiencing this. This is 13, 14, 15 years old. Your babies are going through this and they are not going to tell you because they know that you don't like Jake. So I'm not even going to share that with you. So when you see them coming and showing up and they're wearing a turtleneck in summer and it's hot outside, question that. If they're now reclusive, they're not wanting to go out to you with you to family events all of a sudden, question that. If they're, they just got in the house from hanging out with Jake and, they're calling them 5, 6, 7, 8 times, question that. Question. And if you, but I urge you, don't confront them in a judgmental way because that'll make them back up and go back to Jake real quick. What you want to do is have a civilized conversation about, I am here, letting them know I am here. If you ever need to talk, I am here. Listen, if you don't want to talk to me, here's this resource, loveisrespect.org. I love to point that resource out because it's a great teen dating violence website. Go on here when you have a minute. I'd like you, because I'm a little concerned. I'm very concerned, as a matter of fact, about what's happening in your relationship. If you don't want to talk to me, check this out when you have a minute. That's all I'm asking you, honey. Look at this. Make sure you send them to the link that shows them the signs. And maybe it's sometimes it takes, even for grown-ups, when they see things in black and white, they're like, he calls me all the time. He wants to make control the way I dress. He texts, whatever, all the red flags are being checked off. It's like, oh my God, that's me. Sometimes it takes seeing it in black and white for it to jump out at you. If that's the case, maybe that's what you need to do. But don't, I'm not going to let you see Jake again. Well, guess what? They're going to sneak out of the house and then we'll see Jake. That's what you never want to do that. Even with grown-ups, you find your friend or family member going through it.
A very powerful message, Lovern. And I think that parents need to hear that. I'm like, my mind is going, I want to take that whole little snippet and put it right. I just did a teen dating violence webinar. I want to add that to it, because parents need to hear, how do I handle it? And it's hard. It's hard to deal with teenagers, because, they want to shut you out, and it's hard to have that conversation. But
you gotta stay on it.
Really powerful message. We could talk to you all day. And I think that Hope is about to give me the come on, wrap it up there, Schott. So we're going to wrap it up. I encourage everybody to look out for Lovern's book, which will be released in June.
Yeah, you can find it at it's on pre-order status right now, so you can pre-order it from all now. It is at www.thelegacyheleftme.com. Again, thelegacyheleftme.com.
And we'll make sure that we have a link to that pre-order form on Voices for Change, as well as the voicesforchangeradio.com site. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Kelsey, for joining us once again. Your insights are always so valuable. Thank you. Thanks, Hope.
Appreciate you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Yes, this has been great. Lovern Gordon, you are just a gift to us all. Your words, your passion, and to end domestic violence. That is the goal. That is everyone's goal. Who's here on the screen today. Kelsey McKay, as a prosecutor in Austin, Texas, with Respond Against Violence, is her nonprofit. The fantastic Tracy Schott, who is telling stories, and I am proud to produce and promote all the work that you are all doing. So you are listening to voicesforchangeradio.com every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time on Incandescent Radio, my Facebook page, Hope Katz Gibbs. I thank you all, and here's to putting an end to this horrible crime. We'll speak to you all next Tuesday. Thanks.
Woo!